Hi, Brett Johnson here, former United States Most Wanted cyber criminal, now good guy, or as the United States Secret Service calls me, the original internet godfather. Now, how do you get that title? Well, I'll tell you how you get that title. 39 felonies, because 38 just ain't enough. Being placed on the United States Most Wanted list, escaping from prison, and I built and ran the first organized cybercrime community. It was called Shadow Crew. It was a precursor of today's darknet and darknet markets. It laid the foundation for the way modern cybercrime channels operate today. Now, look, there is a whole story behind all that stuff, but we ain't got time for that today. Why? Well, because today it's time for the Brett Johnson Show. Today's episode, my dad is a good man. When we come back. All right, so we are back to the Brett Johnson Show. Today's episode, my dad is a good man. Now, wait a second there, Brett. Hey, man, we watch your show, but you're the cybersecurity guy. You talk about crime. Every now and then you may bitch about some politics or whatever, but what's up with this? What's up with this human interest stuff, man? Well, I'll tell you what's up with it. So, yeah. Brett Johnson, cyber criminal, cybersecurity, all that good stuff. Sometimes I may bitch about politics. I'm going to try not to, because in today's country, do you think we've got a bit of an ideological divide? Yes, I think so. They had a thing on TV on one of the news channels. See, I start my morning every day by tuning in to both Fox News and CNN so I can be pissed off at everybody. I'm an equal opportunity hater. I hate them all. Well, one of the channels had this, they did some survey, and it came back saying, well, 40% of our country is hardcore Democrat, 40% of our country is hardcore Republican, and 20% are just moderates and moderates. I think the survey was skewed. I don't believe 20% of our nation is moderate. I don't believe that for a second. I don't see it. Of course, I'm in Alabama. We kind of in an echo chamber. It's like somebody took a snapshot of the 1950s, just kind of left it here to ferment for a while. That's Alabama. The weather is always hot, humid, and racist. That's Alabama. Nothing to be proud of, just saying it the way it is, because somebody's got to say this shit. What I'm trying to get at, though, is that, yes, sometimes I ain't going to talk about cybersecurity. Sometimes I ain't going to talk about crime or bitch about politics. Sometimes it's a session where I got to get some stuff out. I'm trying to turn my life around, and sometimes it's going to be a bit of therapy for Brett. And maybe this show's like that. Maybe it's not. I don't know. We'll see as we continue to talk. Let me get a drink. So my dad, and I did a show a couple weeks ago called It Takes a Village. That was what I titled it, It Takes a Village. And we talked about how, a safe world, a secure world is one where everyone's working together. And during that show, I talked about my stepmom. My stepmom was an outstanding human being. She's the only person I've known in my entire life that refused to lie about anything, regardless of the consequence. And she always did the right thing, regardless of who it might hurt or anything else. She was adamant about doing both of those actions. And when I got out of prison, so I got out of prison in 2011, and I was not ready to be a legal guy. And I didn't have any money or anything else like that. So I moved in with my father and my stepmom, Pat. And my dad was very lenient with me. My stepmom was not. She had rules of the house, and I was expected to obey the rules, or, hey, you can get the hell out. Well, I'm like that now. Back then, I was like, oh, it's so unfair. It's so unfair. I'm being mistreated. Well, let's be fair. At that point in time, I was also ready to go back and commit crime and everything else, and was. My turnaround was a long time. And Pat and I, my stepmom and I, did not get along well when we first met, because she was adamant about doing the right thing, and I was just not ready for that yet. Very hard-headed here. My stepmom passed away 2 days ago. I spoke about it on a show a couple of weeks ago that she was sick, and I went down to see her and everything. And I went down this past Friday. My dad, he's there with her, and she was in the back bedroom, and went in to see her, and her eyes were already set. The hospice nurse had been visiting, and had told my dad that she expected it to be just hours. So, I went down. I didn't want my dad to be alone when she passed. They had been together 29 years. 29 years. They had actually been together a lot longer than that. They were married for a certain amount of years. Then they got divorced because my dad, he just in the head. They got divorced. Then they got remarried after 6 years of separation, and were together. So they were together for 29 years, and then they had a 6-year hiatus as well. So 35 years total. And that's your life mate. That's who you're with. That's who you love. And my dad loved that woman like no other, and she loved him. Truly. They were a great couple. She made him better. He made her better. Just the way relationships are supposed to be is the way that was. So she was passing from Alzheimer's. This is a woman who everyone in her family died from Alzheimer's, and she lived her life seeing everyone pass and scared to death that she was going to suffer and die from Alzheimer's as well. That was her one main fear in life. She didn't want that to happen to her, and it happened. So if anybody wonders, I got Brettyism 1 and 2, and I've preached it for years, and unfortunately continues to be proven correct time and time again. Brettyism 1, life isn't fair. Brettyism 2, no one gets what they want or deserve. Time and again that's been proven right. I hate saying it, because most of the time when it's proven right, it's to the detriment of people. And the world is, Pat passed Saturday morning. I stayed up with my dad. We would visit with her and go there to check in on her and everything as she was passing. I went to sleep about 10 o'clock that night, Friday night. My dad woke me up at 4 o'clock, and Pat had passed. She had died. Then he called the hospice nurse, and she came and did all the paperwork and everything. And then, the funeral home came and got Pat and took her away. And I wanted to be there with my dad so that he wasn't alone when his mate left this world. I thought that was important. And I think it's very important. My sister, very disappointed in her. She hadn't called the man, I told her what was going on. She hadn't called the man or anything else, but that's Denise. That's her choice. I can't control that. But for me, I wanted to be there for my father, and not only for my father, but to pay respects to this woman who lived her entire life doing the right thing, and who I didn't know her very long. I didn't meet her until I got out of prison. I hadn't met her until I got out of prison. And then I was butting my head up against that wall because I was a knucklehead. So I didn't get to know her that long, but she had a massive influence, a major influence on my life and the way that I lead my life today, of striving to do the right thing, of refusing to lie about something, and being adamant about calling out things that need to be called out. That's where I get a lot of that from. I had a great deal of respect for that woman. And she, when I turned my life around, she showed how proud she was of me. So my dad lost, his love, his mate, and I wanted to be there with him. And me and my dad were talking about the past, and I told my dad that I thought that, I told him at one point, I said, Dad, you've always been a good man. I think you went through a point there where you forgot that you were a good man. And I think he understood what I said. He welled up a bit. I did too. And where I got that from, that line is not mine.
See, for those who don't know my history, I created this site called Shadow Crew. It was a precursor of today's darknet and darknet markets. Now, what it actually was, it was a forum. It was a forum. You see, there are 3 sites out there, and those 3 sites are Shadow Crew, Counterfeit Library, and Carter Planet. I ran both Counterfeit Library and Shadow Crew. I also built a lot of the platform of Shadow Crew, that trust mechanism that criminals still use today. I'm responsible for that. So in a very real sense, and I'm responsible for refining a lot of the crimes, the financial cyber crimes that are committed today. Nothing to be proud of at all, but I'm still the guy that built a lot of that. There's a reason I made the most wanted list, a reason I went to prison. Of course you go to prison for that shit, Brett. You think you're not gonna? Yeah, you're gonna. But those are the 3 sites. The third site, Carter Planet, was started by Dmitry Golubov, a Ukrainian. He's on parliament in the Ukraine, a Ukrainian. I've joked for years that Dmitry stands a chance of being one of the next presidents of the Ukraine if Vladimir Putin doesn't kill him first. That was a joke, but it had a lot of truth behind it, as well, as we see today with Vlad the Impaler Putin coming into the Ukraine. And of course, all the Ukrainians are like, not today, Satan, not today, you go away. Yeah, that's Dmitry started Carter Planet, which is the genesis of all modern credit card theft. Before those 3 sites, before Counterfeit Library, Shadow Crew, and then finally Carter Planet come into play, the only avenue you had to commit some sort of organized cybercrime was an IRC chat session, this internet relay chat, a rolling chat board where you had no idea who you were talking to, if you could trust the person you were talking to, if they had a product or service, if they actually had it, or if it worked, or if they were just going to rip you off, because let's face it, everybody there was a criminal. Shadow Crew solved that problem. It gave a trust mechanism for criminals to use that they still use today. And it's proven very effective in being the reason why cybercrime continues to explode in numbers, why it continues to succeed despite the best efforts of law enforcement and security companies across the planet. Yeah, I'm the son of a bitch that's responsible for a lot of that. Nothing to be proud of. But the reason I say that is Shadow Crew goes on to make the front cover of Forbes, August 2004, headline, "Who's Stealing Your Identity?" October 26, 2004, the United States Secret Service arrest 33 people, 6 countries, 6 hours. I'm the only guy publicly mentioned of getting away. Now, you may read some news reports. You may go back to Wikipedia and all that stuff, and it'll say something like maybe 27, 28. Some reports say 23. The number is 33 that was arrested, 6 hours, 6 countries. The reason those discrepancies are there is some of the arrests the United States Secret Service did not really want to mention because they were embarrassing, or, they were operatives working for the Secret Service at that point in time, stuff like that. But the actual number was 33. 33 was arrested, 6 hours, six countries. I was the guy publicly mentioned as getting away. There were a couple of others that got away. Tron was one of them. Tron was a Ukrainian, who was hitting Bank of America. Bank of America would shut him out and he would be back in within 30, 40 minutes. I know that because when I started to work for the Secret Service, Bank of America came in to talk to me about Tron, and they told me that they couldn't keep the guy out. So that was Tron. And the reason Tron got away, Secret Service is in the air to arrest him. Secret Service calls the Ukrainian police. They get the Ukrainian police on the line like, "Hey, we're coming down to get this guy." Ukrainian cops are like, "Oh, yes, you come down and you get him. He will be waiting for you. Yes, he is waiting for you. We will help. We will assist in the arrest." So they hang up with the USSS. Then they get in the car. They drive down to Tron's house, knock on his door. They're like, "Hey, man, it looks like the police are coming to get you." Tron takes off on the run. And they get him later on. But I was the only guy publicly mentioned. I was arrested 4 months after that, February 8th, 2005, by the FBI and the Charleston, South Carolina Police Department. Within 45 minutes, the Secret Service comes in, takes over the investigation. They let me sit in a county jail for about 10 days. Then a couple of agents fly in from New Jersey pull me out of a cell. They look at me, they're like, we got your laptop. I'm like, yeah. You got anything on your laptop? Yeah. Well, you're going to be charged for whatever you got on your laptop. And I'm like, I figured. And the agent looks at me and he's like, anything you can do for us? My response was, because I was arrested 3 weeks before I was supposed to be married, my response was, you let me get back with Elizabeth and I will do whatever you want me to do. They let me sit there for 3 months to get a taste of what jail/prison might be like. Then they got me out and I went to work for the Secret Service. Now, this all boils into, my dad forgot he was a good man. He was always one. He just forgot for a time that he was. I went to work for the Secret Service in Columbia, South Carolina as a consultant/informant paid. I was targeting individuals. It was teaching the agents about how cybercrime actually operated, how those networks worked, things like that, giving ideas on how to capture these guys, things like that. The two head agents were Bobby Kirby and Brad Smith, and they were outstanding human beings. They were two guys that really wanted to see me turn my life around. And over time, I didn't know it until too late. Over time, they became my friends. But I'm the guy that continued to break the law from inside those Secret Service offices for the next 10 months until they found out about it. Then I ultimately go on a cross-country crime spree, steal $600,000 in the space of 4 months, wake up one morning on the United States Most Wanted list, go to Disney World, get caught, arrested, sent to prison, escape from prison, caught again, serve out my time, and ultimately turn my life around. The agents, both Bobby Kirby and Brad Smith, they lost their jobs because of me. Yeah, because of me. I socially engineered them into trusting me when they shouldn't have. And that trust meant that the investigation was compromised. It was compromised because they viewed themselves as friends to me. So this all has a point. It does have a point. You see, what happens is of course, I go to prison. I'm able to turn my life around. I'd always regretted doing that. So I was on another podcast that I ran called Anglerfish. The symbol back here is from the Anglerfish podcast. I just liked it enough that I was like, hey, I'm going to keep that little guy because I like it. So I was doing the Anglerfish podcast and I was over talking to Aaron Sherman for an episode of that. And, I was talking about my actions. And at the end of the show, he was like, hey, man, we may be able to find these guys if you're interested. I was like, man, I think I would like that. So he was able to pull the phone number of Bobby Kirby. And I ended up calling Bobby, finally got in touch with him, and he was in South Carolina. And he agreed to have lunch with me. So I drove from Birmingham, Alabama, all the way to Columbia, South Carolina to have lunch with this man, to apologize to him about what I had done. And we had a great talk, great chat. And during that chat, I apologized. And I told him, Bobby, I'm not a good guy yet, but I'm trying to be a better guy than I was. And he looks at me and he was like, Brett, you were always a good guy. You just forgot for a time that you were. And that stuck with me. So that's what I told my dad. I told my dad, man, you were always a good guy. There was a time when you had forgotten you were a good guy, but you were always a good guy. And during that time, turns out during that time was the entire length of time that he was married to my mom. My mom was an abusive woman. She used to bring men home in front of this man, in front of my father. And my dad was a nonviolent guy. He would not hurt anybody. He was just this soft-spoken guy. And she would bring these men home and inform him that she loved them and she was going to leave him and he was worthless and everything else. And he would sit there and cry and he'd beg her not to do it. And she would do it anyway. So there was a time that he forgot he was a good guy, that he was so scared of her leaving that he became an enabler in the family. He would, if she wanted to commit a crime, he would basically co-sign off to it. If she wanted to abuse someone, he wouldn't stand in the way. And she was a horribly abusive person. She's still alive. She is a horribly abusive person. I've not spoken to her in, I don't know, 3-4 years. And the reason I've not spoken to her is, I'm trying, I think my goal in life, I think that for me, the reason I'm on this planet is to find out who I am, why I've done the things I've done, and understand me. And also to do more good than harm, which is a large task considering my history. But that's why I think I'm on this planet. And I'm adamant about doing both. So I'm, as far as understanding who I am, I put a lot of thought into my past and my choices and taking responsibility for that. So the reason I've not spoken to my mom is she was calling and she was talking because my sister's not spoken to her hell in a decade. And my mom blames my sister for that. And I told my mom, well, no, you were the abuser, and it's healthier for Denise not to engage with you. And my mom got angry with me. Then I started, it finally came to a head, and I was like, look, I said, you were the abuser. And she kept refusing. Then I talked about, how her abuse had started to affect me, the consequences of that. And she blamed me for that, blamed me, the victim. Until I finally put those boundaries up. And I was like, hey, until you're able to accept responsibility, until you're able to discuss this and talk it out, don't talk to me anymore. So, of course, for several months, she would call and cuss me out or leave dirty messages on the voicemail, cuss my wife out, everything else, until finally it stopped. It stopped. So she never accepted responsibility. And honestly, I don't think she ever will. I think she'll go to her grave being the person that thinks she did no wrong. But this is a woman who used to bring men home in front of my dad. She used to beat me and my sister. She used to leave me and my sister at home alone for days. She would sit there and tell us how she had given up her life for us, that she was going to leave us. And then, I mean, we're kids. We're young children at this point. How we would find her dead. She used to tell us, I could go into this stuff, but it was just nightmare type stuff. My sister at one point tries to commit suicide because of it. Me, it took me 30 some years to talk about it. I start catching my parents gone and I start urinating on the floor. Didn't know why until I mentioned that at a conference, and somebody who had dealt with abused children comes up to me and tells me, hey, it's common for abused kids to do that because it's the only mechanism of control the child has. So I did that. I ended up assaulting somebody because of this and everything. And, the effects of that was nightmarish. And my dad was an abused person too. He was brought up in a good family, a good loving home. So he had never been subjected to abuse. He didn't know what that was like. And all of a sudden he enters into this relationship with my mom, gets married to her. And she turns out to be a horribly abusive person. It becomes almost like this frog in water. You don't know you're done. Water continues to get hotter and hotter and hotter. And finally, you're cooked before you even know it, before you realize what's happening. And I think that was what he went through. He didn't know how to cope with that abuse. He's from an area where you don't talk about that. You don't talk about mental problems or anguish or things like that. And he kept it tapped down. He forgot for a long time that he was a good man. So, that's this episode. I think, my dad, I said he became the enabler. And there are some stories on that, man. I mean, at one point, so he was a captain in the military, in the Army, helicopter pilot. This is a guy who was convinced that he should have died in Vietnam. He didn't go to the Nam, but he was convinced that he was supposed to go there. He's seen that Mel Gibson movie, We Were Soldiers. And he's convinced that was his fate, that he was supposed to go there and die. He really believes that. And maybe it's true. Maybe it's true. But he lived, and I'm grateful that he didn't go over there. But he was a captain. He went through OCS, Officer Candidate School, became a captain in the Army and helicopter pilot. So, of course, the Army tries to downsize. And they offer him as like, hey, you can get booted down to an enlisted person, or you could just drop out, sign out of the Army. What do you want to do? So, well, at that point in time, the coal industry was booming. They were paying excellent money, more than the U.S. military. So he was like, I'll just go be a coal miner. So he signs out. He spent 8.5 years in the Army, signs out, and we all moved back to Eastern Kentucky to for Dad to be a coal miner. Mom was an LPN, a nurse, and my mom would she would work long enough to see she would start a job and then quit the job, make sure my dad was gone. So she would quit the job so she could go out and party at night, go to bars, sleep with other men, things like that. Leave me and Denise home. My dad's at work. So that was my mom. And we slowly went broke. We did. Because the coal industry was not everything that it was hyped up to be. It turns out that you were on strike more than you were working. And when you were on strike, you got unemployment, you signed up for food stamps, and times were hard. So, you were on strike all these months. And then you'd come off strike, you go back to work, and you'd have to make sure your bills that you had missed out on were paid. And it was this recurring cycle where finally you start going broker and broker and broker, and you get poorer and poorer and poorer. My mom, of course, not working. My dad, really the only provider in the home. And we're going broke. And they get this bright idea. But so, my dad, he was the enabler except for two instances. He adopts the criminal mentality 2 different times. And the first time, we're going broke in Eastern Kentucky. He had a friend, Tommy Allen Combs. And Tommy Allen was part of the what's called the Cornbread Mafia in Eastern Kentucky. You see, you don't just have the gangs up in New York, the mafia in New York, the mafia in Italy, and, out there you got the West Coast gangs and all that. You got gangs in Kentucky, too. You got the Cornbread Mafia, where they will kill you. You fuck around. So Tommy was part of the Cornbread Mafia, and he had served time in the penitentiary and hadn't snitched on anybody, had not told on anybody. So my dad wanted to get a job. He was tired of struggling. He was tired of going broke, and he had a bright idea that, he's a helicopter pilot. He could fly marijuana back and forth across the Texas-Mexico border. Bang, 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 make a lot of money. So he goes and starts talking to Tommy, and Tommy was an outstanding. I mean, okay, he was a criminal, but I got to tell you, he was an entertaining criminal. And to me, I was 7 or 8. To me, he was a good guy. This is a guy that I talk a lot about criminals justifying their crimes. You're doing one bad thing here, and then you try to make up to it for it by giving to charity, by trying to help the community. You see that with John Gotti. John Gotti helped everyone in this community as he was killing and murdering people, running drugs, trafficking, everything else. So you try to. Criminal mentality is you try to balance things out. I gave a lot to charities when I was committing crime and everything else, trying to tell myself and convince myself that, hey, business wise, I get you, but in real life, I'm a good guy. Yeah, I help a lot. That's not uncommon with criminals. You see that time and time again, and it was no different with Tommy Allen. He had, for his neighborhood and the area that he lived in, Eastern Kentucky, he made sure all the children were dressed, all the children had shoes. And we're talking about basically, if anyone is aware of Eastern Kentucky, it's like a third world country. People are abject poverty. I mean, extreme poverty to this day. So Tommy Allen was adamant about making sure that people were fed, that the children were clothed and had shoes, things like that. And he supplied for his entire area to do that. I'm not saying that he was a good guy, but saying that this is what the man did in order to try to justify some of the crimes that he had committed. And he hadn't snitched on anybody. And because he hadn't snitched on anybody, law enforcement was always after the guy. They were always hounding him. They were always poking at him. Again, not an uncommon thing when you get convicted of a crime. And you've not done everything that law enforcement wants you to do. Sometimes law enforcement continues to hound you. So they were hounding Tommy. My dad, he knows Tommy pretty well, so he's going up, trying to talk the man into hooking him up, and it does happen. Evidently everything's green lit. Tommy has the speech with him. Hey, man, you can do what you want to do, but you start this job. This is your job. You ever screw them over, they will kill you. Do you understand? So Dad was all set to to become this helicopter pilot, moving drugs back and forth. He had gotten so desperate that he wanted to provide for his family. This is a man that he worked hard his entire life. When we I'll get to that in a second. But what happens with Tommy? The job kind of falls through because one day the sheriff of Perry County, Kentucky, where I live, where he lives, the sheriff calls Tommy up, and the sheriff tells him, "Hey, Tommy, it's Pearl Couch down here at the sheriff's office. We got a warrant for you. Need you to come on in." And Tommy's like, "I'm not coming in. You'll have to come down and serve it." So Pearl's like, "Okay, we'll send a couple of guys over to pick you up." So they send a state trooper and they send a county deputy out, and Tommy Allen proceeds to put one in a wheelchair for the rest of his life and murder the other. A 6-hour standoff ensues from that point, shootout, everything else, and they finally end up killing Tommy in his house. He decided to hold court in the street, and my dad decided that transporting drugs back and forth across the Mexican-Texas border may not be a good choice. So he gives up that idea of being an aspiring criminal. The next thing that happened was, he had two ideas for committing crime. Both of them failed miserably. The second idea is one night he used to watch 60 Minutes all the time. And 60 Minutes had a segment about the Miami drug trade, and they were showing the pallets of cash, the pallets of cocaine, and my dad's sitting there just locked on it he just zeroed in on just watching this is interesting. Nobody could talk to him during his segment or anything else. My mom notices my dad's concentrating on him. She's watching him back and forth, watching TV, watching him like, what's this guy doing? So the segment gets finished. My dad looks over at my mom and he's like, I think I need to go down to Miami and be a Miami law enforcement officer. And my mom, by this point, knows what time it is. She's like, I think that's an excellent idea. And the idea was he could get down to Miami, become a cop, happen upon one of these drug deals like they were showing on 60 Minutes, and he would let the drug dealers take the drugs and he would take the cash and everyone would be nice, warm, and fuzzy. He refused to acknowledge that there was just as much a likelihood, even a better likelihood, of those drug dealers shooting his ass and burying him where his body would never be found. He was like, oh, that wouldn't happen. And if you continued to try to point it out to him, even as a young child, he would get a little irate. So based on that idea alone, Ma and Pa Johnson sell everything that they can in the house, load up everything else in a U-Haul with a Doberman and 2 kids, and proceed to drive south on I-75 until they arrive to Miami. They get in Miami the night the Miami riots broke out. You got riots in the streets. Got there that night. We were staying at a Days Inn, and you looked across. The Days Inn was right next to this overpass, and the overpass underneath of it, you had all the homeless people that were living there. You had chairs and tents and everything set up, and we had never seen anything like that. My mom had never seen anything like that, and she's convinced that all those homeless people are going to come over to the hotel while my dad's gone and kill and rape us all. That's what my mom's bitching about. My dad's like, Carolyn, everything will be fine. So he goes to cop school day one, comes back, and he's got a smile on his face. Oh, I think it's going to be just fine. I think we're just fine. Day 2, he comes, and he comes home from the cop class day 2, and he ain't got a smile anymore. He's like, hell, we got to get out of here. These people are crazy. Turns out what happens is, in the middle of class, the real Miami cops, they burst in and arrest like 6 people who had outstanding warrants, who were trying to become police officers, who had the exact same idea that my dad did. Oh yeah, we'll come across a drug trade. We'll let them keep the drugs. We'll keep the cash. Everybody will be happy. No one will. None of those people realizing, no, those drug dealers, they will put a bullet in your head. So my dad was like, we got to get out of here. They crazy. So by this point, they're broke. They're broke. They don't know where to go. They're running out of money. They start going north on I-75, get up to around Orlando, and they both remember at that point in time, they had no idea where they were going, but they both remembered that they had spent spring break in Panama City, Florida. So based on that alone, they go to Panama City. And my dad worked hard his entire life trying to provide for his family. The only job this man could get was as a night clerk at 7-Eleven in the horrible part of Panama City, the violent part, making $140 a week. That's the job that he got. My mom got a job as a nurse, an LPN. She kept the job long enough to make sure my dad was working the night shift. And then she quit her job and would go out partying with other men. So that was what happened until finally my mom leaves my dad. And we moved back to Eastern Kentucky. And my dad, he tried hard his entire life. And like I said, he went through a period where he just, like I told him the other day, Pat was dying. And I was like, Dad, you were always a good man. You just forgot for a time that you were. And it was a time that you were with my mom. And I guess the reason I'm talking about this today is the circle of people around us really does have an influence on our lives, that safety net, that support group. So we should be careful of who we allow into that. We should always strive to have healthy relationships. And that's easier said than done. Oh man, oh buddy, is that easier said than done? When you get emotions involved in the mix and everything else, it's much easier said than done. Many times we're involved in toxic relationships, and we have toxic people around us, or we're toxic ourselves, and we make bad decisions, and then we try to cover up those decisions, and we just continue to spiral. My dad, he went through that for years, married to my mom for years, and he allowed it to happen. I mean, it's a choice, but it's a choice, as any abused spouse will tell you. It's a choice that is, I don't think it's an active choice. It's this passive choice of being involved in something you don't really understand it. You don't know how to get out of it. You're just trying to do your best, trying to navigate it. You've got love involved, where you think that if you continue to go on, that everything will work itself out fine. And it never will. It never will. The abuse will never stop. It just continues to get worse. This is a woman who tried to poison my dad, tried to murder my dad, tried to cut his throat. I woke up one night, my dad had left my mom. She had climbed in, she had found us, had climbed in through a window. I hear some sort of scuttling in the living room. I walk in, my dad, he had been asleep on the couch. I walk in, my mom's got a knife to my father's throat, threatening to murder him. There's another point when she tried to poison the man. She had made spaghetti and put Decon rat killer in the spaghetti. Me and Denise, we're in grade school. We come home, there's spaghetti on the stove, and my mom's like, oh, don't touch that. That's for your father. Well, she had poisoned the stuff. What saved him is that before she could get him to eat it, she had hit him in the head with a big crystal statue. And he had to go to the hospital, get the stitches sewn up. She had tried to kill him like that because she just couldn't wait for him to eat the poisoned spaghetti. So my dad was an abused person, and he forgot. He forgot that he had been a good guy. He had forgot what that was like, because he was just so into my mom and trying to cope and navigate the abuse to which he was being subjected. So he had forgotten that. So I guess the point of all this is, when I turned my life around, I took an active choice to build a safety group, a support group. And what I did was I did it through LinkedIn, guys. I went, and my connections on LinkedIn, I tried to reach out to every single law enforcement officer that I could, because I needed to be healthy. And I was like, at least I can build a support group where people will always be looking at me. If law enforcement knows that I'm there, if I get in the public eye, then I'll always be looked at. And that was how I started building this, until I was able to, on my own, not break the law. If I have people looking at me, it becomes much harder. Then finally you get where you're at the point where I can handle this. And I'm getting there. I was able to survive the pandemic. As I've said in the past, I'm the only fraudster to go broke during the pandemic. I'm proud of that, by the way. But I went down to visit my dad because my stepmom is dying. And we just talked. We talked about my mom, about the abuse, about turning our lives around. So, the thing is there a point? Is there a point to me telling all this kind of stuff? Well, I think there is. It's, the people that we surround ourselves with tends to have a negative or a positive influence on our lives. Or as my granddaddy used to say before he left this planet, you mess around with shit long enough, you're going to get some of it on you. I'm sure I'm not the only one that's ever heard that expression. But, you know, the people we associate with has a huge influence on our lives. If you are an addict, if you're an alcoholic, what do they tell you? People, places, and things. Get away from the people, places, and things that you used to associate with when you were an addict or when you were a criminal, and you will tend to do better. Get a brand new environment, get some new friends. You know, my dad, that's easier said than done. That is easier said than done when you're involved in a relationship, when you're married to someone. You know, there are all kinds of abused women, abused men in relationships. They get involved in a toxic environment. Maybe they don't understand it. Maybe they keep hoping for the best, hoping that it'll stop. They love the person that's the abuser, and they keep thinking, you know, if I just bear through it, if I just keep going, it'll stop. You know, I know he's sorry, or I know she's sorry. You know, the abuse happens, and then you get the apologies that come in, those insidious apologies. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean that to happen. Please forgive me. It only happened this once. I'll never do it again. I'll never touch you again. I'll never mistreat you again. I'll never abuse you again. And it never works out that way. It never works out that way. Like I said, it's easier said than done sometimes to get out of that environment because of those emotions, because of that relationship. So I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, not everything revolves around cybersecurity or cybercrime. There are these things that go on that everyone needs to be aware of. I just wanted to talk about that because, you know, my dad was married to my mom. I want to be honest, my dad did not leave my mom. My dad tried at one point to leave my mom. He actually filed for divorce, and that was that knife to the throat incident that I mentioned earlier. She sneaks in a window and she's holding a knife to the man's throat, threatening to kill him, and he's begging her not to. And my mom had this thing that if she did go too far, and it was often that she did, if she went too far, she would always up the game. She would always do something else even bigger to distract against that. So you forget about that and would have to concentrate on this other thing. So my mom realizes that, you know, she sees me horrified that she's about to kill my father. She realizes that she's went too far. So what does she do? She gets up, she goes into the bathroom and pretends to cut her wrists, trying to commit suicide. Pretends she takes a safety razor and scrapes her wrist up, is what the woman does, forcing my father to forget about what she had just done to him and to try to take care of her. And that's exactly what she did. That's exactly what he did. He runs to her, you know, Carolyn, are you all right? Are you all right? It was always that. And not everything, like I said, not everything is cybersecurity and cybercrime. There are these human elements that go on that need addressing, that need that. And the reason I'm telling this to you today is my dad went through that. My dad went through that abuse. My mom leaves my dad. Dad didn't leave my mom. My mom left my dad. He was not strong enough to do that. So she leaves him. And it's the best thing that could ever possibly happen to him. The best thing, because a couple years later, he meets Pat, his wife, the woman that died, my stepmom, a truly good woman. And I made the comment to my dad that I really think he had to go through that relationship with my mother so that he would better appreciate the relationship that he had with Pat. And where I get this shit from, there's a place, believe it or not, there's a place I get this shit from. And it's this, my life. I try to apply a lot of the stuff that goes on in my head, and a lot of the stuff that I've done or done to others. I try to apply it as life lessons. So I've been asked a lot, you know, well, Brett, would you change anything? If you had stuff to do all over again, would you do anything different? And of course, they want you to say, whoever the interviewer is, wants you to say, well, yeah, I'd change all kinds of things. It's like whenever they ask me, well, would you ever break the law again? Are you fully rehabilitated? And they want you to say, no, I would never break the law again. And yes, I'm fully rehabilitated. When that's the farthest thing from the truth. The truth is that if you're a criminal, if you've really turned things around, you're a recovering criminal. You know what those triggers are that would get you back to commit that crime again. And you try to make sure that those triggers never come to be. You put a support group in place like I did, surrounding myself with law enforcement. You know, you reach out and you talk to people. You try to make sure that those triggers never come to be, never come into play. So it's not that you're no longer a criminal, but you're recovering like an addict. You're recovering. Same thing with abuse. You know, you're always recovering from that. So I'm asked a lot. I'm like, you know, would you ever change anything? And I've done a lot of bad things. God bless, I've done a lot of bad things in my life. I've victimized a lot of people. I've hurt a lot of people. I've hurt myself. I've hurt others. I've stolen from people I knew, people I didn't know. I've lied to everyone. I've led a despicable, despicable life. But I'll tell you, I was able to turn that around. I had a lot of people that helped me turn that around. And these days, I like me. Not only do I like me, but I know without a shadow of a doubt that I am doing the thing that I am supposed to be doing. There's not a doubt in my mind that I'm exactly, and I'm not a religious guy. I'm not. But there's not a doubt in my mind that the powers that be, that the God that's out there, he has me exactly, or that God, I won't say he, because it could be a she, or it could be both. That being has me exactly where I'm supposed to be. There's not a doubt in my mind about that. And I like who I am. And because of that, yes, I have deep, deep regrets. But I also know that every single person, everything that's been done to me or everything that I've done to somebody else has led me to this point in my life. So while I do have huge regrets, I wouldn't take anything back. Not a thing. And I applied that to my dad's life. You know, you had this fantastic relationship with this woman, Patricia. And I think the reason that you're able to fully appreciate that is the hell that you went through prior to meeting that woman. I don't think that you would have appreciated it as much if you hadn't went through that. And he agreed with me. So it's you know, I don't know what the purpose of this episode is today. I wanted to get that out about my dad. I wanted to talk about that idea of being a good person, because I think most of us have went through issues where we forget who we are. We forget that we're fundamentally good people. And I believe that. I believe that fundamentally everyone is good. There's very few purely evil people on this planet. There are some, but there are very few. I think that the circumstances just happen where we forget that. And my dad went through that. Do I think I was a good guy? I don't know. I think I've done a lot of bad things, and I think that that I'm becoming a much better person than I was. And that journey's not ended. And I'm thankful that it's not ended, because I want to continue to try to improve and do better. But my dad went through that. I just wanted to get that out today, guys. I mean, it's not your usual episode. I'll come back with a cybercrime episode, I promise. But to me, it's important to talk about this and get it out, because I love my stepmom. I wish I would have got to know her more. And the influence she had not only on me, but on my father was huge. And my dad, this is a man who tried his entire life to, he was like me. He just wanted to be loved. And he found the woman that did love him. And they had a very special thing. He said he was a good man. He just forgot he was for a while. I think we're going to close it out on that. I mean, sometimes there's no big lesson to be had. And sometimes maybe there is a lesson here that's just not spoken. I'm Brett Johnson. This is the Brett Johnson Show. As we always say, stay safe, stay secure, stay vigilant. That's a really nice tagline, but it all boils down to, at the end of the day, just do the right damn thing. I'm Brett Johnson. This is the Brett Johnson Show. Thank you so much for listening.